Hello and welcome to another make from Dazatron's Diorama llama. So in this video we're going to make a base for Origins Hordak. This is the deluxe version that came out recently. Picked this up from Forbidden Planet a few weeks back and really impressed with this figure. It's the buzzsaw version, so he does have the projectiles in his chest, which should work here just by pulling down his cape a little bit. They do shoot out quite far, actually, these do, so they go quite a long way. And of course, there you go. And with the announcement of the Masterverse Hordak from Mattel, which is also coming out soon, and I can't wait to pick that up, I thought this would be a good opportunity. So here we go. So I've already cut down a block of 2-inch styrofoam. Again, if you've got smaller pieces, you can glue them together. So I have done that before with a couple of 1-inch blocks and just put them on top of one another, so that's easy enough to do. So again, you could make yours taller or more shallow, it really is up to you, but I've gone for about 2 inches. I felt that was about, it looked about right with the figure. So yeah, so the overall size is 5 inches by 5 inches square. And then you can see I've just made a kind of a border along the edge there. And we're talking about, yeah, 1/2 inch border. So once you've measured all of that out, and it is really important that you do that, and you've got all your sides as flush as you can. I mean, I know they're still a little bit textured. They could be filed down a little bit more. But because I'm going to create a gradation on these, it doesn't matter too much if the edges are a little bit rough. It's obviously just for measuring purposes that you need them reasonably accurate. Yeah, so I'm just going to use a little coping saw here, because that would do the job, or you can use the electric foam cutter, which I'll show you in a moment. Just whatever you got at hand, really. So this would just give us a slight gradation, which is what I want, so it doesn't look quite so blocky. And also looking at the source material, with Hordak's Lair and his throne room, you get that kind of gradation leading up to his throne. And then I'm just, of course, filing that down just to make those edges a bit smoother. So once you've got the two sides done, it's then just a case of measuring the other two sides. As you can see, I'm doing that here. And I'm just using the electric foam cutter here. You do have to be quite careful with this. You need quite a steady hand. Otherwise it does look quite wobbly. I mean, it's very hard to get a smooth finish anyway with this kind of foam cutter, particularly the handheld version. So you do always need to do a bit of filing or sanding afterwards, which I'm okay with. But you might want to one of the desktop kind of versions where you will get a much smoother cut. So I've got the gradation on each side. So the top of my base is now 4 inches wide after the gradation. So I'm just marking out or finding the halfway point. And then I'm just also marking about a 1/2 inch either side of that halfway point. And this is just to create some of the details. Again, if you look at the source material, you'll see this kind of part that kind of extrudes out, and so I'm just trying to kind of, create that bit of detail. You do need to do the same at the bottom, so you can just, again, get those measurements as accurate as possible. And then once you've got all your kind of lines measured, then just kind of join up all of those little dashes, so you know exactly where to cut, and do that on each side. So I'm now just going to, again, add a measurement for the recess, how far I want some of those details to kind of come in. because I do want there to be kind of a rounded, kind of almost like a pipe, I suppose, on each corner. So I'm just finding those halfway points again. And then I'm just going to draw in the shape that I'm looking for. So I'm just adding this kind of like curve on each corner. And then just using a Sharpie pen, that's all this is. I'm just marking out how far in I want that recess. Can't remember exactly how much this was. It's probably 1/4 of an inch, I would imagine. You may want to use a ruler for this. I've just drawn it freehand. It really is up to you. So you can see there, I've got my kind of design laid out. And then it's just a case of cutting into those areas. So I do need to also, yeah, mark out this design on the edges also. So again, I know where to cut to. So there's my piece with all the measurements and markings lined out. And then I'm just using one of the small files just to, yeah, create, I suppose, a cut really on each of those lines. So I'm using the edge of the file, and I'm holding it at a slight angle because I want that gradation again on the middle piece. So I'm just going to keep cutting that away until it lines up with my marks on the top of the base. And the same on the other side. And then also the same on the corners. So that again is just giving me an idea of how far in I need to cut. Now, you could easily just file all of that down, but that would take a little bit of time. So I'm using the floristry knife, as you've seen in my previous videos. And I'm just cutting down on both sides to that edge and then removing the middle of the styrofoam until I'm happy with that kind of the surface and it's reasonably flat. And then I can just use the file then just to finish that off. It is worth, yeah, just going back in with the knife just to get a smooth kind of corner. At the end of the day, we are trying to create the impression that this is kind of made out of metal. So we do want it, you know, reasonably accurate. I mean, I don't, you know, in my other videos I don't mind dents and little nooks and stuff like that, but yeah, try and get it as smooth as you can. And you can see that works reasonably well. And then do the same for each of the other sections. So here is the piece once I've cut away all of those areas that I've marked out. And you can see already it's starting to look a bit more interesting to the eye. And again, it's looking more like the source material. So the next part is to start adding some more details. So you can see on this piece here, I've already started to do that. So I'm adding in some of these kind of lines that go across. On the source material, it looks like these are actual kind of gaps. Almost like they're kind of slats, but that'd be quite difficult to do. So rather than using a pencil as I've used before, I'm using one of these clay wire tools. They're and they're actually quite useful for this because you've got this kind of metal loop. It just tends to slide across the styrofoam quite nicely, and you get a smoother line. So you do need a loop tool, and the rounded tools are better because some of them are more angular. So I'm just marking in now where I want these lines to go. So again, I'm working on about 1/2 inch, and you could use a pen or a pencil to mark them in. I'm just using the tool itself and just creating a little dent just to mark in where those measurements are. And then you'll need to do the same on the other side as well. And it is really important that these are as kind of parallel to one another as you can get them, because it would just ruin the effect. And you also want the lines to flow around the whole piece, so they do need to be lined up with one another, which can be quite tricky when you're trying to use a ruler on a 3-dimensional form. So do be wary of that, and just make sure if you've already drawn the lines on the one side that they do line up with each other. So then use the ruler just to mark out again where you want those lines. Then remove the ruler and just gently just move side to side with that wire tool. Again, you could use a pencil for this, but I have found this slides a little bit easier, particularly over these kind of curved edges here. So I'm just trying to get right into the corners, and then just kind of let that flow over the edge of these kind of corner pieces. Once you've got a slight indent, it's much easier then just to kind of go in a little bit deeper. And I just think this adds just, yeah, it just makes it look more interesting. I think it finishes off quite nicely. And then on the corners, I have added a few more lines in between the ones that are already in place. Again, just to distinguish between the corner pieces and the side pieces. And I just think that looks, again, a little bit better. I'm using here some sandpaper just to get rid of the texture of the styrofoam. You'll have seen me talk about this before. When you do buy in styrofoam, sometimes some of the sides have a different texture to the other sides, so you can see the difference even on this piece here. So once you've smoothed that out, I'm now trying to create these kind of wing pieces that they're going to go on the back of the base. So I'm just using this offcut. So it's a thinner piece of styrofoam. You'll have noticed the edges are not smoothed out because I've used the wire cutter on this. So I will need to file those down. But it just gives me something to work from. So I've marked out the middle because I want two pieces pretty much the same size. And then I'm just marking out how tall I want these wings to be. And that will depend on the size of your base, the size of your figure. If I was creating this stand for the Masterverse version, I might have to do a bigger version. I don't know yet, as I haven't seen the figure in hand. But yeah, it depends on the size of your figures. And I'm just marking in this angle for the top of the wings. And then I'm marking in these kind of, yeah, these curves, which will give it more of a kind of a bat wing feel. And just trying to get them as symmetrical as possible. So once you've got your design drawn out, I'm just using the wire cutter. You could try the floristry knife for this. If you've got a little coping saw, that should work as well. Sorry, this is off camera. So I'm just cutting away those top pieces. The great thing about the wire cutter, you do get these nice curves. It's really good for cutting out kind of curved angles. And I'm just going to push right down through the middle. And so I've got two pieces roughly the same. And then it's just a case of neatening those up a little bit, just with a file and a bit of sandpaper, which is what I'm doing here. So get those as smooth as you can. Yeah, do check both sides. It depends on the foam that you were using. Because mine was an offcut, it needed a bit of work on all the sides really. And I found one of the curved files are quite nice for just getting those, again, those curved edges. So I'm using the curved side of the file here. And that just gives a better finish, I feel. Now, of course, you do need to make sure the bottom of the wings are flush to the base. So make sure you've got that kind of, again, as straight as you possibly can. And do make sure they're identical. So do put them together. And here's the piece. So I've just used the just normal super glue for this. Now I actually haven't glued this in place yet. This is the first idea. So I thought about putting the wings just at the back, but actually quite like the idea of having one of the points of the base coming towards you and then just turning the wings at an angle. And I just think this looks a bit more dynamic, a bit more interesting to the eye. So this was the design I started to go for. But if you like the previous version, then of course, you know, it's your base. You can do what you like with it, and they're your choice to display how you want to. And there's Hordak on top of there. So as we come to the, you know, the paint finish, just again, like I've shown you in previous videos, some water, a bit of tissue, just a plate or piece of card would do. A flat brush is useful, and I'm using silver acrylic paint here. So you do want a metallic finish. I think it just, again, just makes it look a bit better. And then I'm using is it the Vallejo or the Vallejo model colours here. These are kind of the wall paints, the miniature paints that you can pick up. So I've got a set of those, and I'm using the pastel blue there. Now if you look at the source material, you will see that the base is actually quite dark, but I wanted to go something a bit lighter just so it stands out a bit more or makes the figure pop a little bit more. I was thinking about maybe going red, but again I wanted that contrast between the base and the figure. So I put a generous amount of the silver paint and the pastel blue paint here, and you just really need to give that a good mix. The one thing I will say, it's really important that you use decent brushes. Most of the tools I use are cheap tools, and the reason I do that is because I want you to be able to have a go at some of these bases without having to buy lots of materials. But when it comes to paint brushes, you can't really cut corners. You need a decent brush. So these are just Cotman watercolor brushes that I use, and they tend to work quite nicely. But you certainly don't want to pick up the, you know, brushes for a couple of £1 from a hobby store or anything like that, because the hairs would just come out, and it just won't do as neat a job really. For dry brushing, absolutely cheap brushes work a treat, but not when you're just applying regular paint. So yeah, I've laid down the colour or over, and I've let it dry, and you can see there it still gives you that metallic finish. So even when you're mixing the silver with the regular colours, it looks like it's not metallic anymore, but as it dries out, it still catches the light. So it is worthwhile mixing metallic paint with other colours and just see what you get. I mean, you can use whatever colour scheme you want with this. So then I've also started to add, again, a few more details in the indented areas there. And I'm just using a rigger brush. So that's the really long brush that you can see there. Again, this is a Cotman brush used for watercolours, but it's ideal for getting into those really small areas. I've also tried to add a bit of some kind of distress marks or some weathering effects there. And that's just using the same colour that I used to the base, but adding a bit more black and blue, just to darken up some areas. So to do that, I'm using the Vallejo colours again, and the reason why I'm using these is because they're already watered down, so they do tend to go on into some of those finer areas or those details much easier than using the thicker acrylics that I've used before. If you don't have these, you could just water down regular acrylics and it will give you a similar effect. Just make sure it is watered down. So I'm using black, Prussian blue and the pastel blue that I used earlier, and just put in a really small amount of this stuff. You don't need a lot. I'm just mixing the Prussian blue and the pastel blue. And I'm just going to add a little bit of black, as that's a bit too strong at the moment. So I just want to tone that down a little bit. You don't need much black at all. And of course we do want it much darker than the base colour. And then we just need to add some water to that. So even though it's already quite loose, I just find it goes on a bit better if you add a bit more water. And you do want to, if you hold it up, it should be able to kind of flow. As you can see, it's starting to drip down the palette there. So that's about the consistency you want. And then very, very carefully just drag that brush along those little indents that we made earlier. And then I'd also just use your finger while the paint's wet and just, move your finger along the top. And that just means if you have gone over the edges anywhere, it just creates a nicer finish. But do try and get that line as smooth as you can, and the rigger brush really helps for that. You might have another really kind of fine brush that you could use, and that would work just as well. But I do find the rigger brush really good for line work. So I'm just working into all of those indents, and of course we need to do that on each side. And you can see there, it just makes those details stand out now. I have seen people use Gundam pens for detailing like this. So I haven't tried one of those, but you might have one of those at hand. You might want to invest in that. And I'm using the same colour. I'm using a smaller flat brush. So that's kind of the square tip. And just at the bottom of the wings, I'm just lightly brushing that on. I don't want it to be heavy colour. I want it to kind of blend into what's already there. Again, just to make it look a bit more weathered and distressed. Yeah, just the same on each edge. There we go. And then just the final touch, you don't need to do this, but I think it adds something when the base catches the light. I'm just using some more of the metallic paint, so the silver paint in this instance, just a really small amount. And I'm using the flat brush again. And we're just going to use this just to add a touch of the metallic silver onto each edge. Anyway, as I said, it would just help those details catch the light. So I'm just loading up the brush just by adding a bit of that silver paint on each side, and then I'm wiping that off. Now this isn't a dry brush effect that we're going for. It just means you're not adding any kind of big blobs of paint where you don't want it to go. And I'm just lightly going to brush that silver on the very kind of edges, particularly on the top of the base there. Just going back to the mixture and adding a little bit more of that silver. So again, nice and gentle, just on the very corners, the very tips. You won't really see this very well on the video, but when you've got this in hand, it does make a difference. So you'll have to trust me on this one. And just add that wherever you want to. So I'm adding it on the corners, these middle parts. And there we go, that's pretty much the paint job finished. And here he is in all his glory, Hordak himself. And there is our finished painted base. So I hope you like this. This is aimed at beginners. I do think anybody could do this with a few tools. So I do hope you have a go. I think it elevates the figure. So yeah, if you have enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. If you've got any ideas for future makes, please do comment. I always love to hear your feedback. And just at the end of this video, I just wanted to give a shout out to ToyPix0885 on Instagram, who recently posted his own versions of some of his bases that he made for his figures, inspired by these videos. So I was really encouraged by that. And if you do make any of these, please do post them on Instagram. Yeah, copy me in. I would love to see them, because that's what this is all about. That's why I started this channel. It was just to inspire people who collect toys to, yeah, just kind of show their appreciation for their toys, really, by making these bases. So I do hope you get some ideas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.